The first thing I heard was breathing. Not mine. It was coming from behind a locked door in the basement of my own house. The worst part? I had lived there for 16 years, and I had never known that door existed. My name is Ethan Parker. I'm 52 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I thought I understood my life. I had a quiet house in Columbus, Ohio, a steady job, and a wife I had loved for nearly 2 decades. Then a furnace technician sent me a text that made my entire world feel suddenly unfamiliar. My wife, Marissa, was away in Nashville visiting an old college friend. She'd been gone for 3 days, and honestly, I was enjoying the rare freedom of having the house to myself. I ate leftover pizza for breakfast, watched sports too loudly, left my socks wherever I wanted. It was peaceful. Then the furnace started making a strange noise. It wasn't the normal clicking and rattling I'd heard 100 times before. This sound was deeper, metallic, rhythmic, almost like something was scraping against the inside of the machine. I called a local repair company. About 45 minutes later, a technician named Martin Cole arrived. He grabbed his toolbox and headed downstairs. "Give me 20 minutes, he called. I went back upstairs. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated. It was Martin. "Mr. Parker, there's a locked door behind your storage shelves." I stared at the message. I typed back, "What locked door?" His response came almost immediately. "4 locks, all on the outside, and I can hear someone breathing behind it." My hand went cold. 4 locks, on the outside. I ran downstairs. Martin was standing beside our old metal shelving unit. He had pulled it several inches away from the wall. And there it was, a gray door I'd never seen in 16 years. 4 heavy padlocks hung from its metal brackets. Then I heard it. A slow inhale. A slow exhale. Someone was alive in there. Martin looked at me. "Should I call the police?" "Already doing it." 8 minutes later, 3 officers were standing in my basement. They cut through the locks one by one. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. The door finally opened, and there was nobody inside. No person. No furniture. Nothing. Just a spotless concrete room, a small speaker in the corner, and an old prepaid phone sitting on a cardboard box. One officer picked it up. The phone was warm. "Someone activated this recently," he said. I looked at the empty room, then at the 4 locks, then at my phone, and suddenly, one thought hit me harder than the fear. Someone hadn't wanted me to find this room. They had wanted me to believe someone was trapped inside it, and somehow, they had known exactly when to make me call the police. But I still didn't understand the real reason. Because 2 days later, detectives would find something with my name on it. Something connected to a woman I had never met. And when I saw her photograph, I would recognize the place where I'd seen her before. Not in person, not online, but inside my own house, hidden inside something my wife had owned for years. And that's when I realized the locked basement door wasn't the beginning of the nightmare. It was the first move. The detective's name was Marcus Reed. He arrived at my house 2 days after the basement incident, carrying a thin folder and wearing the kind of expression that told me he had already formed questions I wasn't going to like. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. Then he asked, "Ethan, have you ever rented a storage unit on Mercer Road?" I almost laughed. "No." Marcus didn't smile. According to their records, I had. The unit was registered under my full name. The signature looked like mine, and the payments had supposedly been made in cash. Then they opened the unit. Inside were several pieces of women's clothing, a prepaid debit card connected to an account bearing my information, and one photograph. A woman in her 30s. Dark hair. Soft smile. She looked completely ordinary. That somehow made it worse. Marcus slid the photograph toward me. "Do you know her?" I stared at her face. "No. Her name is Natalie Cross." I shook my head. "Never heard of her." Marcus watched me carefully. Natalie was reported missing 11 days ago. My stomach dropped. A missing woman. My name on a storage unit. Her belongings inside. And suddenly, the locked room in my basement didn't feel like a strange mystery anymore. It felt like evidence. Evidence somebody had planted for police to discover. But there was something I couldn't explain. Something I didn't tell Marcus. That evening, after he left, I went upstairs and stood outside my bedroom. Marissa's side of the room looked exactly as it always had. Her books were stacked beside the bed. Her lavender candle sat on the dresser. Her reading glasses were folded neatly beside it. Everything looked normal. And somehow, that normality hurt more than anything else. I walked toward her nightstand. There was a battered old crime novel she'd been reading for years. I picked it up. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me already knew where to look. I opened the back cover. A photograph slipped onto the carpet. I froze. It was Natalie, the same woman from the detective's folder. The missing woman whose belongings had been found in a storage unit registered in my name. I sat down slowly on the edge of our bed. For 16 years, Marissa had slept beside me. 16 years of birthdays, Christmas mornings, quiet dinners, arguments over stupid things, apologies before bed. All those ordinary moments I had believed were proof that I knew my wife. Now I was holding a photograph of a missing woman, hidden inside her favorite book. My hands began to shake. I kept thinking about all those mornings when Marissa had sat right there with her coffee, turning the pages without a trace of fear. How long had she known Natalie? How long had that photograph been there? And why had she kept it? That night, I didn't sleep. I kept staring into the darkness beside me, listening to my wife's empty side of the bed. For the first time in 16 years, I wondered whether I had ever truly known the woman lying there. Then I remembered something the detective had said. The storage unit wasn't the only thing connected to my name. There were financial records too. And when I started digging through them, I discovered something far more terrifying. Money had been disappearing from our accounts for years. Not thousands at a time. Small amounts. Careful amounts. The kind nobody notices. Until you add them together. And when I finally did the math, I realized Marissa hadn't been preparing for weeks. She hadn't even been preparing for months. She had been preparing for me to fall apart for years. I called my oldest friend, Caleb Morris, the next morning. Caleb had known me since college. He was the kind of friend who didn't tell you what you wanted to hear. If you were making a mistake, he'd look you straight in the eyes and tell you. I told him everything. The basement, the hidden room, the storage unit, Natalie's photograph, the police investigation. He listened without interrupting. Then he asked one question. Who controls your bank accounts? I frowned. Marissa. How long? I thought about it. Almost since we got married. Caleb leaned back. And you never checked them? I saw the balances. Bills were paid. We had savings. What exactly was I supposed to worry about? He stared at me. Everything. That one word stayed with me. I spent the next several hours downloading statements. 5 years. Then 6. Then 7. At first, I found nothing dramatic. No huge transfers. No massive withdrawals. No obvious criminal scheme. Just little transactions. $120 here. $175 there. Small electronic payments to companies I'd never heard of. Cash withdrawals spaced several months apart. Amounts carefully chosen so they wouldn't attract attention. I kept scrolling. My eyes started burning. Then Caleb added everything together. The total was more than $72,000. I stared at the number. $72,000. Gone. Not stolen yesterday. Not taken during some recent argument. Gone gradually, quietly, patiently. I felt something inside me collapse. But the money wasn't what destroyed me. It was the date of the first suspicious transaction. 14 months after our wedding. I looked at Caleb. She started this that early? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I suddenly remembered our first apartment. The cheap furniture. The boxes stacked everywhere. Marissa sitting on the floor, laughing because we'd accidentally ordered a table that was too large for the dining room. I remembered thinking I'd found my person. And all this time, she may have been building something behind my back. Caleb came over the next morning. We covered my dining table with bank statements, storage documents, police paperwork, and everything else I had collected. Then he asked me something strange. When was that storage unit rented? I gave him the date. He stared at me. Where was your phone that night? On my nightstand. Where was Marissa? In bed. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Your phone wasn't locked back then, was it? I stopped breathing for a second. No, it wasn't. Marissa knew my passcode. She knew my signature. She knew my routines. She knew when I left for work. She knew when I came home. She knew almost everything about me. And suddenly, the storage unit didn't seem impossible anymore. She could have taken my phone while I slept. She could have used my identity. She could have signed the paperwork, then returned home before I ever woke up. I looked at the paperwork again. My signature was there. Perfect. Too perfect. Caleb pointed toward the basement incident. Now think about the furnace. I felt my chest tighten. What about it? You said you called the repair company from your phone. Yes. What time? I checked my call history. 8:41 a.m. I was already at work. I had been inside the office for almost an hour. My parking record proved it. I stared at that call for a long time. Then everything fell into place. The furnace noise, the technician, the hidden door, the recording of someone breathing, the police, the storage unit. It hadn't been random. Someone had designed the whole thing. Someone had wanted a repairman to discover that door. Someone had wanted the police inside my house. And someone had wanted my name connected to a missing woman. I looked toward the stairs. For 16 years, I had called that place home. Now every room felt like a crime scene. Caleb lowered his voice. "Ethan, this isn't someone trying to scare you." I looked at him. "What is it?" He hesitated. Then he said the words I had been desperately trying not to hear. "Someone is building a case against you." My throat tightened. I thought about Marissa, her hand in mine, her head against my shoulder. The woman who knew exactly how I took my coffee. The woman who knew what time I woke up. The woman who knew how deeply I loved her. And then I realized the most terrifying part. She didn't just know me. She had spent years learning how to make the world believe I was someone else. I didn't confront Marissa. That decision was harder than anything I'd ever done. Every part of me wanted to walk into the kitchen, put the bank statements in front of her, hold up Natalie's photograph, and demand the truth. But Caleb stopped me. "Not yet," he said. I hated those words, because every minute I spent pretending to be normal felt like I was betraying myself. But Caleb was right. If Marissa had spent years building a case against me, then she was expecting panic. She was expecting me to make one stupid mistake. So I gave her nothing. I went home that evening and kissed my wife on the cheek. She smiled. "How are you feeling?" I looked into the eyes of the woman who might have been destroying my life piece by piece. "Better," I said. She wrapped her arms around me, and I almost broke. Not because I wanted her back, because I remembered who I thought she was. For 16 years, I had trusted that woman with everything. My fears, my money, my passwords, my future. And now I couldn't even tell whether the tears in her eyes were real. A few days later, Detective Marcus Reed returned. He asked questions about the storage unit. Marissa sat beside me. She held my hand while he spoke. "I don't understand any of this," she said, her voice trembling. "Ethan would never do something like that." I watched her carefully. She was perfect. Concerned wife. Loyal wife. Terrified wife. Then Marcus asked, "How do you know it's a setup?" Marissa didn't hesitate. "Because I know my husband." Something about that sentence bothered me. Not the words. The certainty. She hadn't said, "Ethan couldn't have done this." She hadn't said, "I know he would never hurt anyone." She simply said she knew me. And suddenly I wondered how much of that knowledge had been used against me. That night, I called my older brother Nathan. Nathan had served in the military and had a completely different way of looking at problems. He listened while I explained everything. When I finished, he asked, "Who does Marissa trust?" "Her friend Tessa." "How often do they talk?" "Constantly." Nathan went quiet. Then he asked, "Does Marissa have somewhere private in the house where she makes those calls?" "The sunroom." "Then that's where you need to listen." I stared at him. "You want me to spy on my wife?" "No," Nathan said. "I want you to find out what she's planning before she finishes it." 2 days later, Nathan helped me set up a small recording device in the sunroom. Then I waited. Not for hours. Not for days. For 18 days. 18 days of pretending I was still the same trusting husband. 18 days of smiling at dinner. 18 days of watching Marissa move through the house as if she hadn't secretly turned my own life into a trap. Then on a Thursday evening, Tessa arrived. I told Marissa I was going to Caleb's house. Instead, I parked several streets away. I opened the recording feed. For nearly half an hour, they talked about ordinary things. Work. Family. A restaurant. Then Marissa's voice changed. The warmth disappeared. Her words became quiet and precise. And the first sentence I heard made my blood run cold. "Ethan still has no idea." I gripped the steering wheel. Tessa asked something I couldn't make out. Then Marissa answered, "That's exactly what I need." I stopped breathing. Then she mentioned Natalie's name. And when she explained where Natalie had been hiding all this time, I realized the missing woman wasn't the only person Marissa had been controlling. There was someone else involved. Someone who had been helping her. And then Marissa said something that made me realize my life wasn't simply being ruined. She was waiting for the police to finish the job. I stayed inside that parked car and listened to my wife explain how she planned to destroy me. My hands were locked around the steering wheel. I could barely breathe. Marissa told Tessa that Natalie was alive. Alive. The woman whose photograph had been found in our house. The woman whose belongings had been placed inside a storage unit under my name. The woman the police believed had disappeared. She was alive. Marissa said Natalie had agreed to stay hidden for nearly 2 months. She had paid her enough money to keep quiet. And according to Marissa, by the time Natalie returned, I would already be trapped. Tessa sounded nervous. What happens to Ethan? Marissa's response was almost emotionless. He becomes the answer they're already looking for. I closed my eyes. That sentence destroyed something inside me. She wasn't angry with me. She wasn't trying to punish me after some terrible argument. She was calmly arranging my life so that strangers would believe I was capable of something I had never done. The police already had my name. They had my identity connected to the storage unit. They had financial records that looked suspicious. They had a missing woman connected to my property. And Marissa intended to keep adding pieces until the entire story pointed toward me. Then she laughed. Not nervously. Not sadly. She laughed like someone who had just finished solving a difficult problem. I ended the recording. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I knew exactly what would happen if I rushed into their office with a recording I'd secretly made and accusations against my own wife. Marissa would get a lawyer. Tessa would deny everything. And Marissa would have time to erase whatever evidence remained. I needed Natalie. If I could find her, the entire story changed. So I hired a private investigator named Victor Hale, a retired detective recommended by Caleb. I gave him one instruction. Find Natalie Cross. Victor didn't ask unnecessary questions. 6 days later, he called me. She isn't missing. My heart stopped. Where is she? Phoenix. Victor had found her staying at a hotel under a slightly altered name. He sent me photographs. Natalie was alive, standing outside the hotel, carrying a coffee, looking completely unaware that her disappearance had almost destroyed an innocent man's life. Victor met her in person. At first, Natalie was terrified, but when he explained that I had been framed using her disappearance, she finally told him everything. Marissa had approached her months earlier. Natalie needed money. Marissa offered her a large payment if she would disappear temporarily and follow specific instructions. She had been told where to stay, what name to use, who not to contact, and most importantly, she had been promised that nobody would get hurt. Natalie believed her, until she learned what Marissa had done with my name. That was when she became frightened. She gave Victor a written statement. Her hands were shaking while she signed it. Then she started crying, and I understood something painful. Natalie wasn't the enemy. She had made a terrible decision, but she hadn't understood the full plan. Marissa had used her too, just like she'd used me. Now I had 2 things my wife didn't know about: the recording and Natalie. I could have taken both straight to Detective Reed, but I wanted Marissa to understand something first. She had spent years making me predictable. She knew when I woke up. She knew when I left for work. She knew how I handled money. She knew how I reacted under pressure. She believed she knew exactly what I would do when I discovered the truth. So I decided to do the one thing she had never prepared for. I stayed quiet. Then on Friday evening, I sent Marissa an anonymous message. No explanation. No threat. Just one photograph. Natalie, alive, standing outside that Phoenix hotel. And beneath it, I attached the recording of Marissa's conversation with Tessa. Then I closed my laptop. 40 minutes later, Marissa walked into our bedroom. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. She simply stood there holding her phone, completely motionless. For the first time since I'd known her, Marissa looked genuinely lost. And as I watched her from the darkness, I realized something. She finally understood that somebody had been watching her. But she still didn't know who. And the next morning, I was going to put the entire truth in front of Detective Reed. Only this time, I wouldn't be sitting across from him as a suspect. I barely slept that night. Not because I was afraid of Marissa anymore. I was afraid of what would happen if I moved too soon. For weeks, she had believed she was controlling the story. Now I had the recording. I had Natalie's statement. I had the financial records. I had the call history proving that I couldn't have made certain calls when the records claimed I did. And I had something even more important. A timeline. Every suspicious transaction. Every strange event. Every moment Marissa had quietly positioned another piece on the board. I spent Saturday morning organizing everything. I printed the documents. I labeled the dates. I put Victor's photographs in order. Then I placed Natalie's signed statement on top. I wanted Detective Reed to see the entire picture without having to trust my memory. But before I went to the police, I did one more thing. I called Caleb. "It's time." He understood immediately. "You're sure?" "No," I said. Then I looked at the folder in front of me. "But I'm done being afraid." That afternoon, I drove to the police station. I carried a dark blue folder with a metal clasp. Inside were months of evidence. Maybe years. Detective Reed was already waiting. When I placed the folder on his desk, he looked at me. "What is this?" I sat down. "The reason you should stop investigating me." He opened it. The first thing he saw was Natalie. Alive. Then her signed statement. Then the financial records. Then the phone logs. Then the recording transcript. His expression changed slowly. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to know that the story he'd been investigating was beginning to collapse. He listened to the recording himself. Marissa's voice filled the room. Calm. Controlled. Familiar. I watched Detective Reed's face as my wife explained how she intended to let the investigation swallow me. When the recording ended, he didn't speak for several seconds. Finally, he looked at me. "Where is Natalie now?" "Safe." "Can she testify?" "Yes." "Who recorded this?" I hesitated. Someone who was afraid nobody would believe him. Reed stared at me. Then he looked back at the folder. "You should have brought this to me sooner." "I know." He leaned forward. "Why didn't you?" I looked down at my hands. Because I had spent 16 years believing my wife loved me. Because every time I thought about exposing her, I remembered the woman she used to be. Or the woman I thought she was. And because some part of me had still been waiting for her to prove that I was wrong. But I didn't say any of that. I simply said, I needed to know how far she'd go. Reed's expression hardened. "And now you know?" I looked him directly in the eyes. "Now I know she never planned to stop." The investigation moved quickly after that. Natalie gave a formal statement. Victor handed over his photographs and records. Caleb provided the financial analysis. And Detective Reed began examining every document Marissa had created. The more they looked, the worse it became. There were fraudulent accounts. False records. Payments I had never authorized. Evidence designed to make my identity appear connected to places I'd never visited. Marissa hadn't built one lie. She had built an entire ecosystem of lies. And the most painful discovery came last. Some of the suspicious activity wasn't recent. It went back almost 8 years. 8 years. I sat alone in my car afterward and stared at my house. The porch where Marissa had kissed me goodbye before work. The kitchen where we'd celebrated anniversaries. The bedroom where I'd once believed I was safest. All of it suddenly looked different. I wasn't mourning my marriage anymore. I was mourning the man I'd been inside it. The man who trusted without checking. The man who thought love meant never questioning the person beside him. That evening, Marissa sat across from me at dinner. She smiled. "You seem distant." I looked at her. For 1 second, I wanted to tell her everything. Then my phone vibrated. A message from Detective Reed. "We have enough. Do not confront her. Let us handle the rest." I put the phone face down. Marissa reached across the table and touched my hand. I let her, because she still believed she was ahead. And I knew something she didn't. The police weren't coming to question me anymore. They were coming for her. The next 3 days were the strangest days of my life. Marissa continued behaving as if nothing had changed. She cooked dinner. She asked about my work. She reminded me about a soccer game we were supposed to attend that weekend. She even kissed my forehead before bed. And every time she did, I wondered how many times she'd performed that same tenderness while secretly preparing to destroy me. But I followed Detective Reed's instructions. I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse her. I didn't even let her see that I knew. I simply waited. On Tuesday morning, Marissa was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked downstairs. She had a cup of coffee in front of her. 1 spoonful of sugar. The same little routine she'd followed for years. She looked up. Morning. Morning. I poured myself coffee. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled. "Did you sleep okay?" I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded. "Pretty well." She looked relieved. That was when I realized something that hurt more than I expected. She wasn't worried about losing me. She was worried about losing control. At 8:17 a.m., there was a knock at the front door. Marissa froze. Just for a fraction of a second. Then her expression changed. "What was that?" I looked toward the hallway. Probably the police. Her face went completely still. I had never seen anything like it. The woman who always had an answer suddenly had none. Another knock. Harder this time. Marissa Parker opened the door. She turned toward me. Her eyes were different now. Not loving. Not frightened. Calculating. You knew, she whispered. I didn't answer. Ethan. I looked at her. Did you really think I wouldn't eventually find out? She stood up so quickly that her chair scraped the floor. You don't understand. Those words almost broke me. Not because they were convincing. Because they were so familiar. I'd heard them after arguments. After mistakes. After nights when she'd come home late. I used to believe you don't understand meant there was something I needed to hear. Now I knew it meant there was something she needed to hide. The officers entered. Detective Reed followed them. Marissa looked at him. Then at me. Then back at him. What is this? Reed didn't answer immediately. He showed her the warrant. Her face drained. Ethan, tell them this is a mistake. I stared at her. For 16 years, she had been the person I ran toward when life became difficult. Now she was looking at me like I was the last door between her and freedom. And suddenly all the anger disappeared. What remained was grief. Pure, exhausting grief. I remembered our first apartment. Our wedding day. The first time she told me she loved me. The nights we'd fallen asleep holding hands. Maybe some of those memories had been real. Maybe they hadn't. That was the cruelty of betrayal. It doesn't just destroy your future. It forces you to question your past. The officers placed handcuffs around her wrists. Marissa didn't fight. She simply stared at me. As they walked her toward the front door, she stopped. Why? I looked at her. You know why? No, she whispered. Why did you do this to me? I felt my chest tighten. To me. She still thought she was the victim. I stepped closer. I didn't do this to you, Marissa. Her eyes filled with tears. You destroyed everything we had. I shook my head. No. I looked at the handcuffs. You did. She stared at me for several seconds. Then she asked the question I had been waiting to hear. How did you know? I almost answered. Almost. But Detective Reed stepped between us. Let's go. Marissa was led outside. At the doorway, she turned around one final time. For the first time in 16 years, I couldn't read her expression. No calculation. No performance. No carefully chosen words. Just a woman realizing that the future she'd planned no longer belonged to her. The patrol car disappeared at the end of the street. I remained standing in the doorway. Alone. I had won. At least that's what everyone would have called it. But standing inside the house where I'd spent half my life loving her, victory didn't feel like victory. It felt empty. Then my phone rang. It was Detective Reed. His voice was unusually serious. Ethan, there's something else. My stomach tightened. What? We found another account. I closed my eyes. Another account? Yes. And what's in it? There was a pause. Then Reed said something that made me sit down. Because the money wasn't the shocking part. The name attached to the account was. It belonged to someone Marissa had never told me existed. The name Detective Reed gave me was Evan Parker. My own name. For a second, I thought I'd heard him wrong. What? Evan Parker, Reed repeated. Your name is attached to the account. I felt the air leave my lungs. Another account. Another version of my identity. Another piece of my life that apparently existed without me. But then Reed explained. It wasn't a bank account. It was a private financial file containing years of information about me. My routines. My work schedule. My insurance records. Old addresses. Travel dates. Even copies of documents I'd forgotten existed. Marissa hadn't simply been watching my money. She had been building a blueprint of my life. And that was when I finally understood the truth. She hadn't spent years planning how to leave me. She had spent years planning how to make sure I couldn't recover after she did. The police later uncovered more evidence connecting her to the fraudulent accounts, the storage unit, Natalie, and the false records. Tessa eventually admitted what she knew. Natalie testified. The financial trail became impossible to explain away. And Marissa was eventually convicted on multiple charges related to fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction. But strangely, the courtroom wasn't the moment I felt free. It happened months later. I was standing in the backyard one Saturday morning. The same backyard where I'd spent years mowing the grass. The same garden Marissa had planted. I looked at the empty space where her flowers used to grow, and I realized something. For weeks, I had been thinking about revenge. I wanted her exposed. I wanted everyone to know what she'd done. I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the fear she'd put inside me. But eventually, I understood that revenge wasn't the thing that saved me. The truth did. The truth gave me my name back. It gave me my house back. It gave me the ability to sleep without wondering whether the person beside me was secretly planning my destruction. But the hardest thing to recover wasn't money. It wasn't my reputation. It wasn't even my marriage. It was trust. For a long time, I questioned every person who was kind to me. If someone offered help, I wondered what they wanted. If someone said they loved me, I wondered what they were hiding. Betrayal had taught me to search for traps everywhere. Then one morning, something changed. I stopped looking backward. I sold the house. Not because Marissa had won. Because I didn't want to spend another year walking through rooms filled with memories I could no longer trust. I moved into a smaller place on the other side of town. I bought a new coffee maker. Started coaching youth soccer again. And slowly, ordinary life returned. A year later, I received a letter from Marissa. I almost threw it away. Instead, I opened it. She didn't apologize. Not really. She wrote about circumstances, pressure, fear, mistakes. She explained everything except the one thing I wanted to hear. Why? I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Some questions don't deserve the rest of your life. And that's the lesson I learned. Marissa spent years studying me. She knew my signature. She knew my routines. She knew my passwords. She knew exactly how I would react when frightened. She believed that meant she knew me. But she made one enormous mistake. She studied everything I did. She never bothered to understand what I thought. She thought I would panic. I became patient. She thought I would confront her. I gathered evidence. She thought she had built a perfect trap. I simply waited until she stepped inside it herself. She spent years constructing a prison around my name. I only needed a few weeks to find the key. And if there's one thing I want you to remember from my story, it's this. Sometimes the person who knows you best isn't the person who loves you most. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should never underestimate. Marissa knew my name. She knew my signature. She knew the life I'd built. But she never knew my limits. She never knew how much betrayal could change a man. And most importantly, she never knew what I was thinking. That was the one thing she could never control. And in the end, that was the one thing that saved me.